A nice real-world application of probabilities is in genetics. So it was completed in 2003. The Human Genome Project was a 13-year-long project designed to completely map the genetic makeup of Homo sapiens, humans. Researchers hope to use this information to treat and prevent certain hereditary diseases. The concept behind the project began with Gregor Mendel and his work on flower color and how it was transmitted from generation to generation. From his studies, Mendel concluded that the flower color seems to be predictable in future generations by making certain assumptions about a plant's color, which is the determiner. He concluded that red was a dominant determiner of color and that white was a recessive determiner. Today, geneticists talk about the gene for flower color and the allele of the gene. A gene consists of two dominant alleles, two reds. A dominant and a recessive allele, which would be red and white, or two recessive alleles, which would be two whites. Because red is the dominant allele, a flower will be white if and only if no dominant allele is present. So later, work by Reginald, Punnett, I just know it as Punnett, showed to determine the probability of certain flower colors by using Punnett squares. So that's what we're going to use, is what's called a Punnett square. It says using a capital letter for a dominant allele, R for red, and the corresponding lowercase letter is a recessive allele, so a lowercase r for right, Punnett arranged the alleles of a parent in a square. A parent could be capital R, which would be dominant in red, capital R, lowercase r, which would be called a carrier, but it's still red, or lowercase r, which would be white. So again, whether it's two capital R's, one capital R, both of those would have red color. Both of those would have red color. The first one is called dominant. The second one's called a carrier. The only way that this could be white, the only way the flower could be white, is if it had both of the lowercase r's, both of the white alleles. So it says, suppose that the genotype's genetic composition of one parent is lowercase r, so they're recessive, so that means they are white in color. And the genotype of the other is capital R, lowercase r, so that one would be red and called a carrier. It says the parent is represented in the left column of the square, the second parent is represented in the top row. It says the genotypes of the offspring are shown in the body as the result of combining one allele from each parent. So here's my lowercase r situation. That's the first parent. Here's my uppercase R, lowercase r. So all we're going to do is write them in order. So for instance, this one takes the uppercase r and the lowercase r. Same thing with the next square. And then the other two are lowercase r. Remember, these two cases right here would be called carriers. And they would have red, they would be red in color, but they are called carriers. The only way to be white would be two lowercase r's, which are these two right here. So these ones right here would be white. So it says, because each of the genotype's offsprings is equally likely, there's 2 out of the 4 cases that are red, and there are 2 out of the 4 cases that are white. It says the probability that a flower will be red is 1/2. Again, that's 2 of the 4. And the probability that the flower will be white is 1/2. Again, that's 2 of the 4 possibles. Okay? So just to make sure this makes sense to you guys, let's think of all the different combinations that it is. So what if both parents were dominant? If both parents were dominant, they would both be capital R's. Red, 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 red. Okay, so what would their babies be? Well, the only possible combinations if both parents are dominant are, again, 4 dominants. So the probability of it being red would be 4 out of 4, or 1. The probability of being white would be 0. What if you had one parent was dominant? So there's R, capital R. One parent was a carrier. That'd be a capital R and a lowercase r. Let's see what would happen there. Well, I could have capital R, capital R, capital R, capital R, capital R lowercase, capital R lowercase. Again, 2 of these are dominant, 2 of these are carrier, But notice all 4 of these are red, none of these are white. So the probability of getting red would be 4 out of 4. The probability of getting white would be 1 out of 4. What if they were both carriers? Capital R, lowercase r, capital R, lowercase r. Let's think about what would happen there. We would have a capital R, capital R, capital R, lowercase, capital R, lowercase, lowercase, lowercase. So it looks like one of these is dominant, 2 of these are carrier, and 1 of these is recessive. So the probability of being red would be 3 out of 4. The probability of being white would be 1 out of 4 in this case. The next case is already shown. What if one is a carrier and one is recessive? We could also have a case with what if one is dominant and one is recessive. Let's see what we would get. Seems to me that everyone would have a capital R and a lowercase r. So if one of them is dominant and one of them is recessive, it seems that all 4 of them would be carriers. All 4 of them being carriers, but they're still red, so the probability of being red would be 4 out of 4, or 1. And the probability of being white would be 0 out of 4 because none of those are recessive. And then the last case would be, what if all of them are recessive? It's very similar to the case in which both of them are dominant. All 4 babies would be recessive. So that would mean all 4 of them are white. The probability of being white would be 4 out of 0. The probability of being red would be 0 out of 4 or 0. So those are how the cases work. What happens? You're dominant if you have both capital letters. You're a carrier, but show the dominant trait if you have one capital, one lowercase. And you are recessive if you have both lowercase. So this works for many different things. For example, the color of eyes. Brown eyes are dominant. Blue eyes are recessive. You could create a Punnett square to determine the probability that your child has blue eyes or brown eyes. And again, you would use a capital letter for brown. So for instance, a capital B would represent brown. A lowercase b could represent blue. Okay. So if they had capital B, that would be brown eyes. Capital B, lowercase b, that would be a carrier but still brown eyes. Lowercase b would be blue eyes. The exact same as the cases we've already determined, except they're B's instead of R's, but it's the exact same concept. So let's read example 9. It says a child will have cystic fibrosis if the child inherits the recessive gene from both parents. Using capital F for the normal allele and lowercase f for the mutant recessive allele, suppose the parent who is capital F, lowercase f, so they're a carrier, and a parent who is capital F, which is the dominant trait, which means they have the normal allele. They do not have the disease. Decide to have a child. So again, let's consider those 3 cases. Capital F is dominant. This is no, and I'm going to put CY or CF for cystic fibrosis. If you have a capital F and a lowercase f, they are a carrier, but they still have no cystic fibrosis. And if you have a lowercase f and a lowercase f, they do have cystic fibrosis. That's recessive, the mutant allele. So this is saying what happens if we have someone, the probability that the child will have cystic fibrosis. Again, the 2 parents were, one was a carrier and one did not have it. In other words, the dominant trait. So let's take a look at this. Let's do our Punnett square. We have a capital F and a lowercase f, a capital F and a capital F. What do I get? Well, I get capital F, capital F, capital F, capital F, capital F, lowercase f, capital F, lowercase f. It seems to me that 2 of the 4 of them are capital Fs, which means they are not carriers, nor do they have the gene. That's a 1/2 probability. And it seems 2 of the 4 of them are capital F, lowercase f. And those are capital F, lowercase f, are carriers, but they still do not have cystic fibrosis. So it says, what is the probability that they will have cystic fibrosis? We need 2 lowercase f's. That doesn't happen, so it's 0 out of 4, which is 0. It is impossible for them to have a child who has cystic fibrosis. Now it says what is the probability that they're a carrier. Remember, capital F, lowercase f is a carrier. That was 2 out of the 4, which is a probability of 1/2.